morning once again. As we launch into our series today, let me ask you a question. How many of you remember the first time you were left home alone? Let's say on purpose, right? You know what movie we're going to be covering today when I ask that question. I remember I was about 8 or 9 years old. My mom had to run to my grandma's real quick, and she lived 2 minutes away. And so she's like, do you want to stay home by yourself? And I was like, can I? And so when they left, I thought, what can I do? And what's it going to be like? And before I could even get into trouble, they were already back in the house and just ruined whatever plans that I was coming up with in my head. Whenever you stay home alone, there is a sense of freedom. There's a sense of I'm the boss. There's a sense of I'm in charge here. But in the case of our movie, sometimes you get left home alone, and it's not on purpose, it's on accident. Now, I have a theory about the Home Alone movies, that you have to be under the age of 40 to really appreciate Home Alone. Because that would have put you about the age of 8 or 9 when the movies came out. If you were 20 years old when you're like, this is the dumbest Christmas movie I've seen in my entire life. And some of you right now are like, you're talking about Home Alone and you're basing the sermon today off of the worst Christmas movie ever. We should have slept in today. This is going to be horrendous. The guys are slipping on, micro machines, and they're getting paint thrown at them on the stairwell. It's like two criminals can't figure out how to break into a house and subdue an 8-year-old. Doug, are you kidding me? But for those of us who are under the age of 40, and I'll let you put yourself wherever you belong, this is nostalgic, okay? There's something special about the movie. And you remember watching it when you were a kid, and it was funny. And we just watched this one Friday night for our weekly movie night. And this time I stayed awake for the entire thing. And the whole time I was thinking, man, I really like this movie. Because it just does something for me. Now, here's the thing about Home Alone that you did not pick up on if you don't like the movie, which is probably most of you here. The main theme of the movie is not a kid protecting his house. It's not learning to be independent and do things on your own. The theme of Home Alone is family. That is the underlying theme. And when you watch it and you look for that theme, you see it pop up everywhere, and you see it pop up over and over and over again. So the movie begins with extended family. They're all at the McAllister residence. And one brother really misses everybody, and so he's going to fly everyone to France for the Christmas season so he can see everybody. I'm like, well, what job did he have that he can just fly 25 people to France or whatever it is? So everybody's together, families miss, so we're going to go. There's some conflict at the final pizza, or at the final dinner, because someone ate all of Kevin's cheese pizza. And everybody knows he only likes plain cheese. And it was his older brother, Buzz. If you've seen the movie, you maybe even start to chuckle as you think about how the scene unfolds. Buzz eats all the pizza, then takes some digs at Kevin. Kevin gets mad, shoves Buzz into the glasses of milk, gets all over the tickets, all over the passports. There's conflict. Mom grabs Kevin, drags him up the stairs. How many of you have been drug up somewhere by your mom? And fun fact, when I was a kid, I was not allowed to watch Home Alone because my mom could not stand how Kevin acted when interacting with his parents. So I don't know what you went over to your friend's house to do in secret. I went over to my friend's house. It's like, let's watch Home Alone, but don't tell my mom because I won't be able to come over anymore. That's what my friends and I did. We watched classic Christmas movies. So he gets drugged upstairs, and then his mom, they're arguing, and eventually she says, get up there. I don't want to see you the rest of the night. And he said, I don't want to see you for the rest of my life, and I don't want to see anybody else either. You don't mean that. I think you'd be sad if you woke up tomorrow morning and you didn't have a family. No, I wouldn't. Well, then say it again. Maybe it'll happen. I hope I never see any of you jerks again. And he stomps up the stairs. You didn't know you were going to get quoted half the movie to you here before you, were you? Now, in the night, there's a power outage at 4:30 in the morning. That's going to be on the test later, so just write that down. The family wakes up to a knock on the door. It's the airport shuttle. They're there to pick him up. They scramble, and Kevin gets left in the attic. They are flying off to France before they realize on the plane over the Atlantic, wait a minute, I think we forgot one of our children. Kevin wakes up hours later, just kind of comes downstairs, and he's just trying to figure out what's going on, and then he realizes, I made my family disappear. And then in his head, all the mean things his family said to him over the last 12 hours pop into his head. And then he looks at the camera and he goes, I made my family disappear. And it cuts to energetic music. He's jumping on the bed. He's eating popcorn. He's living his best life. But it's short-lived, because very soon Kevin starts to miss his family. Eventually, he goes to Santa Claus, not the real one, but one of the guys who works for him. And he says, if you could tell Santa, I don't want any presents, I just want my family back. And he names all the members of his family, even my brother Buzz, and if he has time, my Uncle Frank. And the guy is listening to this. He's like, what is this kid even saying to me? I'll see what I can do. And then, that's when the bad guys break in, and that's when the comedy happens. But before all that goes down, Kevin just happens to walk into a church because he hears them singing a song. And while he's there, he runs into his neighbor, a guy that he's scared of. And his neighbor talks about his experience with his family as well. And what I want to do is show you a clip from that scene. So, take a look at this.
I've been kind of a pain lately. I said some things I shouldn't have. I really haven't been too good this year.
Yeah.
I'm kind of upset about it because I really like my family. Even though sometimes I say I don't. Sometimes I even think I don't. Do you get that?
I think so. How you feel about your family is a complicated thing.
Especially with an older brother.
Deep down, you always love them. But you can forget that you love them. And you can hurt them, and they can hurt you. And that's not just because you're young. You want to know the real reason why I'm here right now?
Sure.
I came to hear my granddaughter sing. And I can't come and hear her tonight.
You have plans?
No. I'm not welcome.
At church?
Oh, you're always welcome at church. I'm not welcome with my son. Years back, before you and your family moved on the block, I had an argument with my son.
How old is he?
He's grown up. We lost our tempers, and I said I didn't care to see him anymore. He said the same. We haven't spoken to each other since.
If you miss him, why don't you call him?
I'm afraid if I call him, he won't talk to me.
How do you know?
I don't know. I'm just afraid he won't.
No offense, but aren't you a little old to be afraid?
You can be a little old for a lot of things. You're never too old to be afraid.
That's true. I've always been afraid of our basement. It's dark, there's weird stuff down there, and it smells funny, that sort of thing. It's bothered me for years.
The basements are like that.
Then I made myself go down there to do some laundry, and I found out it's not so bad. All this time I've been worrying about it, but if you turn on the lights, it's no big deal.
What's your point?
My point is, you should call your son.
What if he won't talk to me?
At least you'll know. Then you can stop worrying about it, and you won't have to be afraid anymore. I don't care how mad I was, I'd talk to my dad, especially around the holidays.
I don't know.
Just give it a shot, for your granddaughter anyway. I'm sure she misses you, and the presents.
So eventually, the bad guys come, Kevin defends his home, and the next morning, Christmas morning, his family shows up. And everybody's happy to see him, and they're happy he's alive, everything's great. And he walks to the window, and he looks outside, and there's a heavy snow, and there he sees his neighbor shaking hands with his son and picking up his granddaughter and giving her a hug. And it's a powerful scene. It's my favorite scene in the entire movie. And it's like, he looks at Kevin, he's holding his granddaughter, he waves. And it's like, that's what the movie is about, the importance of family. Now, as I was preparing this message, like we transition now to the spiritual, I just typed the importance of family into my search bar and just see the different things that come up. One of the things that came up was a video. It was Dr. Phil with a bunch of high school kids, okay? And I watched it. That was probably my first mistake, watching a Dr. Phil clip. But I was like, what? I don't know what's going to happen. I'm curious to see, so I'm watching. And he's talking about, like, these kids are like, you know, some of them come from conservative parents. It's like, you know, they believe in the Bible and traditional, that we don't want nothing to do with them. And then one kid was like, I don't want to have anything to do with my mom or my dad or my grandparents because they can't help me get more followers on YouTube or on TikTok. I'm like, is this real life? Is this like an SNL? Like, I got to look at Dr. Phil again. Is this an SNL spoof of something? Like, it really isn't Dr. Phil? No, it's really him. Their kids are like, I want nothing to do with my family because they can't help me achieve my dreams. And Dr. Phil's like, well, yeah, you know, however he talks. He's like, you know, you're going to need your family and they're going to need you. That's what families are about. And of course, they're like, no. Relationships are about what I can get from the person. If I can't get anything from you, I don't want the relationship. I think that's been going on for a while. I don't think it's new with the TikTok generation. I think people have kind of slowly been gravitating towards that. And when you think about the importance of family, the Bible never like says, hey, your family's important. You should cherish and honor those relationships. It doesn't really come out and say it like that because in like Judaism, which the Old Testament was written to, they kind of got that right. There's the 10 Commandments. Commandment 5 is honor your father and mother. And then the Apostle Paul, he piggybacks on it and he says that's the first commandment with the promise, that it may go well for you in the land. And I think Jewish culture was so big on their families and their clans and their tribes and making sure that land stayed in the bloodline it was supposed to stay in. Like, they existed in families so much more easily and better than we do in America in 2022. And even in first century Roman culture, I think they did a better job than what we do now. I will say that if you look at our nation's history, and if you were to look 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, I think the family dynamic looked a lot different than it does today. And in today, we need to be reminded there's a major importance and significance to our families, to loving, honoring, and cherishing those relationships. And we take for granted the people who are in our lives, the people in particular who have gone before us, who have made sacrifices and laid the way so that we can have the lives that we enjoy. That's across the board, but even within the context of your own family. You are who you are because of them, because of their willingness to invest time, energy, and money into your life. Now, as I say all of that, I recognize that not everybody's family story is as clean and neat and tidy as maybe it should be. And I know that there are some of you who could maybe even relate to one of the characters on Home Alone. I haven't talked to my son or my uncle or my cousin or my parent in a long time because there's some major tension. Like, some of you have that experience. Some of you, there's major toxicity within your family. Just toxic relationships and issues and problems. And you're like, I don't want to see him, and I don't know if I can see him. And if I could, I wouldn't. Because it's a dangerous, volatile situation. And I understand that exists. And then, like, we just get busy, don't we? We get busy with life, and we inadvertently, unintentionally, accidentally neglect time with our family. And I think about, like, the people who love Home Alone are probably under the age of 40. The people who are going to like this message are probably going to be over. Because those who are under the age of 40 do not have the life experience to recognize your family's there till they're not anymore. And whenever you recognize Uncle so-and-so or Paul, like, they always sit in this chair for Christmas, well, one day that chair is going to be empty. Or somebody else is going to sit there. And that relationship is not going to be over, but they're going to be with Jesus. And all you'll have in terms of your relationship with them is the memories and the time that you were able to experience. And so I think there's so many family dynamics here with tension on one side and just busyness on the other. And then within taking care of your family, that idea of taking care of your family takes on, kind of different veins of our body. Like whenever you're young, when it says honor your father and mother, you're just supposed to obey. You're supposed to do what you're told. And like my mom didn't like me watching that movie because Kevin was always talking back, and I talked to back to my mom, I think one time. And she was a black belt in karate, and it was in the car. And I did, and poof, like I got hit before I knew what happened. And I was convinced the imprint of her ring was on my front tooth. I just kept feeling it. Because she's, poof. What was that? And like you're just in shock and afraid. That was June 7th, 1989. That was the last time I... So like, she didn't want me to be, but like, when you think about honoring your parents when you're little, you're supposed to do what you're told. You're supposed to be obedient. As you get older, there's still a respect there. I don't have to go to bed at what time my mom tells me I have to go to bed. Although I wish I had someone saying, brush your teeth, it's time to go to bed, I'm going to read you a book, I'm going to tuck you in. I would just love that now. Like, please, can I go to bed? I'm tired. And then as I get older and as they get older, my job as a son is to care for the people who cared for me when I was younger. I understand that trying to care for somebody, there comes a point to where oftentimes you can't provide the care for them that they need. But my job is to make sure that they're taken care of, that I go out of my way to do my best to look out for them, to honor them, and to take care of them. In fact, there's a passage that the Apostle Paul writes. It's in 1 Timothy chapter 6. And he just kind of throws out there, hey, there are people in need, and there are certain people you're supposed to take care of, but make sure that you understand who's really in need and who really needs to be taken care of. So here's how he gets into the passage. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. So there are widows. Their husbands have died. There is no Social Security program. There's no check coming from the government to take care of these women. So it's like they're not going to eat, they have needs. So it's like, well, who's really in need? Maybe some of them have money and some of them don't. That's not the distinction that the Apostle Paul makes. He says, if a widow has children or grandchildren, these children and grandchildren should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. These parents, grandparents, they have helped raise you. They worked. They, with sweat and tears and toil, to provide you food and clothing and shelter. They made sacrifices. Dad didn't buy the boat or the truck that he wanted to at some point in his life because somebody needed braces. So, he is working to provide. And he's going to do without in certain areas of his life to make sure his kids have what they need. And God's like, you want to put religion into practice? You want to see religion play out in a very realistic and practical way? Okay, as you grow up, after being cared for by your parents, you need to turn around and care for them if they have needs or if they need to be provided for. The widow who is really in need and left alone, who doesn't have family around who can take care of them, she puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even while she lives. So here's what Paul's saying. Here's a widow who is in need, but she's got kids and grandkids who need to be taken care of. They need to put their religion into practice and take care of her. Here's a widow who doesn't have people in her life. She's depending on God. The church needs to step in. It's not a burden for the church to help if there's nobody else to help. These widows are widows because they're choosing to remain unmarried but living a promiscuous life. They want to be cared for by the church and get help from the church, but then they go out and do things that are contrary to God's word and God's will. He's like, don't help them. They're trying to play it on both sides. So you've got one group that needs help, and the other two, they need family help, They need to be talked to about how God really wants you to live. So it's a real practical portion of Scripture. And Paul says, give the people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. That's a powerful line. People that you love, people who have loved you, they have a need, and you don't take care of them, you're denying the faith. You're claiming by your actions that God is not alive, that Jesus did not come and die for your sins. You're proclaiming with your actions that you are not a Christian and that you don't believe any of this stuff. And in doing so, you're worse than an unbeliever, because at least we know where they stand. At least we know what they believe, because their actions and their beliefs match up. You're trying to play church. You're trying to have your cake and eat it too. So it's like, I'm a Christian, I'm going to get in some water and get baptized because I want my ticket to heaven punched. But then when it comes to actually living out any part or tenet of the Christian life or experience, I don't want to be burdened with that. I want to do my own thing. I want to have fun. That's why I got my ticket punched. Paul's like, you don't get to just say, well, now I belong to the family of God. My actual family has no bearing. No, they're both important. And when you have people in your life who need to be cared for, especially when they cared for you, and you choose not to, you are denying Jesus as your Lord. And that's worse than an unbeliever. Those are powerful words from the Apostle Paul. I think about the Pharisees who were around during Jesus' time. Jesus, somewhere around 30 AD, this letter was probably written somewhere around 60 AD. So this is 30 years after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. The Pharisees, and Jesus is yelling at them one day. He's like, because you've got money set aside to care for your parents. But you're so spiritual that you take that money and you say, sorry, Mom, sorry, Dad, I can't use this to care for you. I'm going to give it to the temple so that God may be glorified in my gift. And there's speculation that they give it to some guy in the temple who makes an account up, but then gives some of it back so they can line their pockets back with what was supposed to go to their parents. And Jesus is like, you guys are so insane with what rules you choose to follow and what rules you choose to just neglect. So when you got your little shrub with spices on it, you get your spices off and you tithe off of the spices. You're so legalistic in that realm. And then you neglect these big things like mercy and faithfulness and justice. So you tithe off your spices, but then your parents, who deserve to be given a gift from you to be cared for in their old age, you give it to the Lord and act like that's a more spiritual thing when God commanded you to take care of them in the first place. How can you even justify that type of behavior and make it match up with the way God wants you to live? And Paul would say to his audience, the pagans, the people who are far from God, know that you're supposed to take care of your own and not neglect the people who cared for you. So if they know that, but you've reached this level of spirituality where you're beyond that, what type of Christian spirituality do you even have? Paul's like, I'll tell you, you've denied the faith, you're worse than an unbeliever. Now this is just one part of the family experience. One part of what it is to exist in a family. But I think it's an important part. Because I think it's one that we often neglect, especially in our culture and in our society. What does that look like for you and for me, and how does that play out? Everybody's in a different stage of life. Everybody's got a different family dynamic. But here's what I want to challenge you with today. I want you to challenge to choose now what regrets you're going to live with. So think about if you've got a normal family dynamic. And when I start talking about tension and friction within the family, every family has some of that baked into it, okay? It's just part of being a family. It's not all leave it to beaver all the time. Sometimes there's conflict. But oftentimes that conflict reaches a point to where people stop talking to each other. Sometimes, when I talk about a toxic or an abusive relationship, A lot of you have to deal with that. There's so many where I start to talk to people and we sit down and we have coffee and we start talking and I hear your story. Some of you are going through stuff. I had no idea you were going through it. Immediate family, extended family. And like my heart breaks whenever I hear those stories. One, because I just assumed everything was okay and it's not. But then number two, that then like whenever I preach a sermon, it's like I'm preaching from the ideal and assuming everybody's there, and it's just so messy all the time. But when there's an abusive relationship, and the verbal emotional abuse is the hardest to identify and deal with and figure out what you're going to do with it. It's like, well, what do we do when I haven't talked to somebody in a long time? When there is an abusive, manipulative person within the family, and how do I deal with that? And then, just regular tension, and then what if everything's good? Well, if everything's good, Christmas time, and this is something I like about what we do over Christmas, we have these holiday traditions, and we carve out time. We're going to get together as a family. And it is a tornado of activity. The days around Christmas, isn't it? You're like, okay, because you've got multiple family groups. It's like, well, the kids are growing up, now they've got their kids, and they've got in-laws, and everybody's got somewhere else to be, and it's like you've got like this workflow calendar. You have to download Slack just for your family Christmas planning. If you don't know what Slack is, it's an app, and businesses use it to communicate, and okay, good. So you've got Slack, and you're communicating with one another. It's okay, when can you do Christmas? Well, we can't do Saturday at 5 because we're going to be over here. And, well, could you do Sunday? Well, okay, let me think about this. We've got to check with so-and-so. And then it's just like you're trying to figure it out. And it almost seems like, in the midst of the chaos, especially when you have little kids, and it's December and it's cold, and you got to bundle them up, and you carry that car seat out. It's like my arms were like 4 inches bigger just because of car seats back in the day. And you load that thing up, and then you load them out, and they're crying, and they're off their schedule, and people all want to hold them and get in their face, and they're not having it. And you're just like, is this even worth it? Is this even worth running them around and being crazy? Like, are we having fun, right? Are you having fun? I'm not having fun. I'm tired. I want to throw a fit like my 2-year-old's throwing a fit. Like, let's all just walk into the house and stomp and scream, because that's how we feel. And then you're going to miss those moments when they're gone. Doggone it, you miss them a lot. But you have those, it's like, oh my goodness. And I can remember the craziness and running around and doing all this. And I look back and I wish I had the little Tyson, little Clayton with the footy pajamas. Like there's so many times where I'm with them and I try to take a mental snapshot of the moment. Well, I've forgotten all, it's like I'm going to remember this moment. And then like a week later, I'm like, what moment was I supposed to remember and hold on to and cherish as a memory? But good thing is God's blessed us with iPhones. And so sometimes you can capture those moments. And because my iPhone's backed up on the cloud, I can go back to 2000. I can look at all the pictures I've taken. I've got like 30,000 pictures and videos on my phone. And I'll just pick a random Christmas and I go back and I just start looking at pictures and videos. I send them to my wife and she gets so mad at me when I do that because she's like, stop, you're making me sad. And like my kids, we were talking and they were like, I don't know, Clayton, he's always out there in left field. He's not even in left field. He's like in the stands outside the park in left field. And so he's just always getting these really interesting conversations, and he drags Titus into them a lot as well. It makes for really funny videos. In fact, I've got one of those videos I'm going to show you right now. It's I'm teasing. Did your heart drop? There are different ways to make memories with your kids. But, we've got all these videos, and Clay's like, if you could go back for like an hour and just spend time with either me or Titus, which one would you pick, first of all? And I'm like, whoa. But then he's like, how much money would you pay if you could go back and just snuggle like for an hour? And I'm like, oh, a lot. I'd put a second mortgage out on that. If I could go back and just like cherish that, like there was a certain, like when they're babies, they smell really bad because they're always poopy. And then they get older and they start smelling really bad because of, like, hey, deodorant, all that. But then there's that sweet spot where you just pick, and the youth and the hugs and, oh my goodness, the snuggles. And like if I could go back, oh man, I would. Even if it's just for an hour, even if it's just for 10 minutes. And then I have to remind myself, like, there's going to come a point where 50-year-old Doug is going to wish he could go back to the 9-year-old and 12-year-old version of my kids, which is what I've got now. And you can look back across Christmases in the past, and I've got family members holding my kids that are no longer with us. So the craziness and running around, is it worth it? It was worth it. It was worth it. Those memories, those pictures, they're worth it. And you think about, you just kind of think everybody's going to be there until they're not. Like I think about my parents, they sit right up here every 9 o'clock service, they sit right here. And they fact check some of my sermons as I recount the days of my youth. Turns out I was worse than I say I was, and my brother was better than I say I was. But that, I'm going to push that in court, and I'll get that changed. Don't worry. But, like they sit there, my grandma sits there until they're not going to be sitting there anymore. I don't know how long that's going to be. I don't know what that looks like. But we just take for granted the people in our lives, don't we? And one Christmas, they're not going to be there. That's painful. And that's hurtful. I don't care how good of a job you did making memories. You'll regret not being in the moment as much as you should have. So, as you think about this Christmas, and you think about January and February, the months after, don't just carve out time to get together on the 24th or 25th. Look for those opportunities, because you're going to miss it when you can't do it anymore. So there's that side. We talk about the broken relationships for a moment. What do you want to regret? Do you think you would regret if there's somebody in your life that the relationship's icy, there's tension, you've been broken apart, do you think you're going to regret reaching out to them, wanting to go get a cup of coffee? Hey, can we just go for a walk? Hey, can I come over? I just want to talk. You think you're going to regret that? Well, if they're not talking to you now, and they don't talk to you after the conversation, then what do you really have to lose? And I think in different situations, you need to pray. You need to approach every conversation with humility. And they were the ones that's wrong. I know it's always them. It's always them. They're always wrong. We're never wrong. I know how that works. But just maybe there's an opportunity for you to take ownership of a situation so that the relationship can be rekindled and brought back together. Now sometimes, and listen, I've counseled a lot of people in my brief time of ministry. There are times where you may want to make things work, you may want to bridge things back together, and they want nothing to do with it. Paul's like, hey, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everybody. If they don't want anything to do with you, you cannot force them to have a relationship with you. Just like God doesn't force us to have a relationship with him. And that may be painful, and that may be hard, and that may be difficult, but like if that's your reality, it's your reality. And time and prayer can change that, but there are no quick fixes there. But maybe some of you need to make a phone call, need to write a letter, need to send a text message whenever you leave church today. Because if you don't, I think you might regret it. If you write that letter, if you send that text, if you make that phone call, I don't think you're going to regret doing that. You might. Maybe some weird situation where you might. But as the clock of our lives is continually ticking down, you may not know how much longer you have to even reach out to bring that relationship back. Then there's a manipulative, narcissistic person that they just ruin every relationship they touch. I think narcissist is a term that gets thrown around maybe a little bit too much, but I'm not a clinical psychologist. I do see people that are manipulative, that use others around them, and like that's real. There are times where it takes two to tango, but not with a narcissistic, manipulative person. They can abuse you, they can hurt you, they enjoy it, they continue to bring you back in to beat you down. Emotionally, mentally, sometimes physically. In those situations, you need to get out. I'm talking about the importance of family and what regrets you're going to live with, but like, if that's going on in your life, if that's going on in your marriage, what you'll regret is not getting out sooner. Now, if it's a marriage, I want to be careful because I'm running out of time and I'm unpacking, like I'm opening up Pandora's box and I'm not even going to unpack it. I'm opening it up and here it is and I'm going to shut it. And you're going to be like, hey, that wasn't helpful. But you can separate and not engage in other relationships. That's a godly thing to do. You don't separate to then hook up with somebody else. That's not what I'm telling you to do. But if you got a person who's manipulative, they're hurting you, they're hurting your children, get them out, you get to safety, and try to, like, as you continue to pray for them, what does life potentially look like without them? Now, God can do anything. He can change their heart, He can do all kinds of stuff. But do not put yourself in harm's way for the sake of family. Not in that instance, not in that situation. And I think that could be true of multiple family members. Like I said, what percentage of that actually I don't know. I'm not sure. But I do know it's out there because I've counseled some of you. And I know you've had to deal with it. That's why I say, what regrets do you want to live with? So for me right now, the regrets that I'm taking with me is I just took for granted, like my entire family lives in Jefferson County. You just kind of take for granted that they're there, don't you? Like when you all just live together and you live close and you get busy with life and you keep marching on and, you know, in Christmas, it's like, yeah, we'll do Christmas, but how is Christmas any different than a normal Sunday? Because we're together on Sundays anyway. But those traditions, those memories, it's so important. That's what I'll probably regret. I didn't cherish it enough when I had it. Well, what do I need to do? I need to be more present. I need to be more in the moment. I need to be less busy and less worried about trivial things that don't matter as much. So that's the challenge to Doug. Now, you can copy off my test if you want and take my answer, and that can be your challenge as well. But what regrets do you think you're heading towards, and how can you change having a different set of regrets? Family is a great gift that God's given to us. Like most of our gifts, we've made a mess of it, an absolute and total mess of it. But every relationship, every family, redemption is possible because our God is a big, amazing, and loving God. Be thankful for your family. They have made you who you are. And look for opportunities to cherish the different relationships and the different relational dynamics. Because someday, those that you've had will be gone. Someday, you and I will be gone. And only our memories will remain. What regrets do you want to live with? And how do you want to be remembered? That's my challenge for you on this Sunday morning. Father.